So I had another idea about elevating the marble up the y-axis. I created the screw elevator in the previous presentation. I also had this concept of a paddle wheel or a catapult-like device that would scoop up and either lift or launch my marble. And so I mocked up a really quick proof of concept. I just started out with a cube and I did an inner extrusion and a regular extrusion, and I applied a collider object. The only difference with the collider object is that inside collision, I changed the shape from automatic to moving mesh, and that allows it to go from a simple bounding box around the outside of the object to calculate the actual surfaces for the simulation. And what I've done also is I move the axis point, or its center point, off into space so that when I rotate this thing, it'll pivot upon the rotation point. And so I created just a real simple manual animation, a 2 keyframe animation, and I got this result that would lift this ball or launch it depending on how aggressive that animation was, and it works like a charm. So I have another solution, so if this solution pops up a little bit later on, you see how that was created. The other thing that we have the ability to do inside Cinema 4D with under the simulation or the dynamics engine is to create hinges. So we can have things affected by gravity but still be pinned in space or pivoting in space. And this is a really simple thing to get started with. I'm going to create a shape, and so I'll start with a cylinder, and I'm going to move that cylinder up and over just to kind of activate this thing in space, so I can see it a little bit more clearly. I want to change the orientation because and I'm going to send it along the x-axis. And the idea is that I want to swing this thing like a hammer, and I'm thinking of this as kind of a hammerhead. And actually, let me undo that because I'm kind of thinking this through, and I actually want that standing up vertically. I could have changed that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the simulation menu, I'm going to go to dynamics, I'm going to create a rigid body. Now, when I hit rewind and hit play, that object falls just as I would have expected it to do. Okay, I'll rewind the playhead. I am going to change the position along the Y value to something that's easy to remember, like 1300. And the reason I did that is because I'm going to create another object. I'm going to go to Simulation Dynamics, and I'm going to create a connector object. And that connector object is created. I'm going to move it up and over, and I'm going to take a closer look at it by tapping the S key. And right now it's positioned along the X and the Y space. I've moved that around, and I want to line that up with my cylinder. Okay, it looks like it's pretty well in line, but I do want to move it to that same 1300 just for the sake of the demo. It's just kind of an arbitrary number. When I look at this connector, if I zoom in on it, there's a visual aid here, and it shows two sprockets. And that you can think of these as kind of pins or hinges. There's one object that hinges around the other. And this thing will rotate around its z-axis, so we have this connector that's sitting in space, and this is really easy to activate. When I hit play, nothing's happening, and my visual aid turns red. Let me rewind the playhead. If I select the connector and I look in the attributes, the object attributes for the connector, I can drag objects. There's 2 slots where I can drag an object. I'm going to take that cylinder and drag it into the object A, and the minute I do that, I get this visual aid updates by drawing a line from A, the A position, to my cylinder. Now if I rewind the playhead and hit play, now I have this hammer that starts to swing. Okay? Now remember, this thing is swinging because the cylinder has a rigid body applied to it. If I remove the rigid body and I hit rewind and I hit play, nothing happens. Okay, so I got to go back to cylinder, go simulate dynamics, and I got to make sure that there's a rigid body. That causes it to fall. The connector is going to cause it to swing or pivot around that point. So I can see that happening. And so now if I just let this thing swing, it'll eventually come to a stop. And if that hammer swings back up, it'll actually hit this collider and not quite, and bounce back. But anyway, I got another device that I could use to cause this, I could swing this down and have it knock another ball and launch it There's a number of things that I could do, but see how this keeps swinging? It'll take a long time for this thing to swing to eventually come to a rest. And what I could do is I could speed that up if I want to. In the dynamics tag, if I go to the force tab, this linear dampening, anything that's moving in linear fashion, so it's moving, even though it feels like it's rotating, it's actually a motion along. It's not rotating. The object itself isn't rotating, it's moving in linear fashion, so in the X, Y, and Z. We could change that value from, let's say, 0% to, let's say, 50%. So we'll add some dampening to that. So now as this swings, it'll come to rest a lot faster. Okay, and it'll eventually just kind of stop swinging. So that's what dampening does. And angular dampening is for rotation or torque. Linear dampening is for position. I'll just zero that value back out. So it's just something that you can play around with. In addition to that, remember when we first started looking at dynamics, we have the ability to trigger this dynamic not immediately, but on collision. Now remember, this is attached to the cylinder object, and so if I want to have this triggered by an event, let me just take a cylinder, and for the sake of demo, I'll copy this and paste it so I have an exact copy. Remember, cylinder 1 is not attached to my connector. In fact, it doesn't do anything, so let me get rid of that tag. Undo that. I know why it didn't start working. Because that tag inherited the property of on trigger, or this trigger is on collision, not immediately. So let me turn that back to immediately. And so now when I hit play, that top cylinder starts to fall. The minute it impacts with this other cylinder, that hammer should start to swing. There it goes. So I got a pretty complex scenario that's starting to happen here. Now again, I didn't have to drop a cylinder on that in order for that to happen. I could just have the ball tap it and cause that to swing. And so already I got a couple of additional mechanics that I can work into my scenario. I kind of feel like I'll set up maybe some hammers or maybe some teeter-totters that will cause some things to launch or move around. So I have a lot of options to play with. So the key now is just really brainstorm, imagine some solutions for creating a simulation and prototype these small little simple machines inside their own projects, and then we'll get together and start to string these things together inside Cinema 4D. And we'll catch up in the next presentation.